All right, on to the next question. And it's a great question. And the question is, what are the most common injuries that I see in the bodybuilding population? And hands down, I would say shoulders, lower back, and knees. Those are probably the most common areas to have pain in our population. So let's dive into each of those body parts and kind of talk about what are the most common issues that pop up and how I've kind of gone about treating them throughout my career. So when it comes to the shoulder, usually it's very common for pressing movements to be painful. And what I've found to be successful is pretty varied. Sometimes all we have to do is, if you have pain during a flat bench press, we have to simply incline the bench just the first notch, and that knocks out the pain completely. And the athlete is able to train heavy, hard, close to failure, everything that they want to do with just an incline a bit in the bench. In that case, usually we just ride that out. Usually we don't have to work our way back to the flat bench press unless it's some kind of super specific like powerlifting goal. But even then, that's still pretty darn specific, just having that slight incline on the bench. So that's one modification that I found to be quite successful. The next is range of motion when it comes to chest pressing. So that may be putting a block on your chest or setting the safeties up so the bar isn't allowed to come all the way down to your chest. Sometimes it's a matter of, so that's in that example, that would be if you felt the pain at the bottom of the range of motion. Sometimes people feel great down at the bottom, it hurts halfway up, and then it feels good at the top. In that instance, I prescribe partials, right? So almost like 21 style, but missing the middle part. So we'll do the bottom portion of the bench press. We'll do like 5 reps in the bottom third of the movement, and then we're going to press up past the painful range and do the top third of the movement. I found that to be quite successful as well. If that doesn't feel good, I've also done isometrics, right, in different positions. So we want to get as close to that edge of discomfort as possible when we're doing these things. So we'll do an isometric like in the top of the bottom third, pushing that edge of discomfort in that middle painful range. And then we'll do our isometrics there, and then we'll do also isometrics above that middle third as well. So we're getting, if we can't tolerate the movement, even in those modified ranges of motion, the partial range of motion, isometrics can be great in that instance. Also, decreasing load sometimes just does it. Sometimes we try to push the bench a bit too hard and just simply decreasing load and maintaining or dropping proximity to failure can work out in many instances. And technique, exercise technique when it comes to the bench is also something that I touch on often with my athletes. Things like adjusting the grip, right? So widening the grip or narrowing the grip. Making sure that the athlete is setting their shoulder blades down into the bench. Sometimes that is a simple cue that will help really relieve some of the pain and allow us to keep training. Okay, onto the lower back. Usually squats and deadlifts are the exercises that kind of flare up the lower back. And one of the best things that I found for this is implementing some basic mobility work before you train. So things like child's pose, or some knees to chest, or just some basic movements just to kind of get the back just loosened up a bit, and that usually helps a lot. I've also seen pretty often, probably the most common modifiable factor that I use with low back is range of motion. If we're talking a Romanian deadlift, we put some plates on the ground so that when we put the bar down, it hits the plates and not the floor, and it's elevated a bit from the floor. Or we just set the safety in a squat rack to a certain height. Sometimes we decrease range of motion and load altogether, and we get rid of all quote-unquote good volume with that movement. So we'll just do exposure sets. In other words, we will set the bar at shin height, just the bar. And as the athlete is going through their warm-up for a leg day or for whatever day that they're training that movement, we'll have them just do the half of the top, just the top part of the range of motion of the deadlift with just the bar. and we'll do like 3 sets of, I don't know, 8 to 10 repetitions, not to count to any kind of volume, not to get hypertrophy in the hamstrings. It's more just to expose that person to that painful movement without producing the pain, right? It's that graded exposure. We want to do the painful movement in a way that does not provoke the pain, so that it kind of desensitizes that pain stimulus. So that's been a great thing, particularly with the deadlift and the squat too. Set the safeties up high on the squat, or put a box behind you and kind of sit down to a box of various heights. And then how do we get back into our normal training? Simple. We just kind of, like we did, like we always do, follow the principles, right? So if we are doing those exposure sets, if it's that flared up and we really have to drop all the way down to those kind of exposure sets, we just slowly increase the load on those until we get to a point where the load is teetering on that. Okay, we're maybe getting a little bit of a burn here with this exercise. Now we can possibly start adding it into our volume, our weekly volume, and start counting the sets. And we could slowly start decreasing or increasing the range of motion, and decreasing the height on the safety, or decreasing the height on the stops on the floor if we're talking about that deadlift, and slowly start decreasing the depth of the box if we do a box squat, for example. So we kind of increase range of motion, increase load gradually, all depending on the athlete, and just take it week by week and slowly get back into the movements that we want to do. Knees, very similar. I probably could have lumped them in with the low back. Usually squats tend to do it. Also, since we talked about the squat already, knee pain on a knee extension, that's something I've seen often. One of the things that I found very helpful with knee pain on a knee extension, it tends to be range of motion specific. I've seen that quite a bit, where it hurts either like in the lengthened position where the knee is bent, or right at the top where you're kind of locking out your quad. So in those instances, say for example, if there's pain at the lockout of the movement, I would perform the first 3/4 of the range of motion of the knee extension, and then if you want to get some exposure to that painful range of motion, like is always the goal, then we can do that separately with some exposure sets, right? So I just had an athlete recently who had this situation. What we did was we performed the bottom 3/4 of the leg extension, and then we got off the leg extension and we did a standing terminal knee extension. So basically we had him stand in front of a cable column. If he's at the gym or if he was at home, we wrapped a band around like a banister or something sturdy and wrapped it around his leg, and he faced the anchor point. So he faced the banister or faced a cable column or cable stack, and he wraps the strap and the load around his knee, so he's facing the cable column, and the cable is facing forward, and the force is trying to push his knee forward and trying to bend his knee forward. What he's going to do is basically just go up on his toes a bit, let his knee bend 30 degrees or so. Basically the missing range of motion from the knee extension previously, and then he's going to squeeze it back and straighten his knee out against that resistance, and then he's going to let it bend again nice and slowly, and then squeeze it back against the resistance. And what that's doing is exposing the knee to the painful part of that range of motion. The knee doesn't know that it's a different exercise, right? And a lot of times that little terminal knee extension in standing can feel pretty good, even though it's the same exact movement as the knee extension. Sometimes just being in a weight-bearing position changes the way that things fire and the way that the stimulus is applied to the tissues, and it could be a great way to expose the knee to that painful range of motion without reproducing the pain, and then eventually work back into full range of motion knee extensions. The other common exercise with knee pain is the lunge, specifically the walking lunge, forward walking lunge. A simple modification to that would be a reverse lunge. Very simple. So when you are doing a forward walking lunge, a lot of that force kind of goes into like the front of the knee, like the kneecap area. Not that that's bad. It's totally capable of taking that on. But if it is sensitive and it's painful, you could always do a reverse lunge. And that's a completely different kind of mechanic of the movement. It's still very similar. It's still a lunge. You're still getting quads and glutes with the exercise, but it's just different, right? Because you're sitting back into the lunge. So that kind of takes some of that force off of that front, off of the front of the knee, where it's sensitive in this example. So switching to a reverse lunge is a great way to do that, or a rear foot elevated split squat or a Bulgarian split squat is another great way to supplement or work around knee pain with a lunge. I hope that helps. Great question again. And so those are the some of the most common injuries that I see in bodybuilders and some of the approaches that we take to treat them.